Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Kimsey here, and I am so glad to be here. Happy Monday. So, today I'm hopping on to talk about 4 ways that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or intestinal methanogen overgrowth could be affecting your anxiety or depression. So before I dive into it, hello and welcome to the people that are hopping on so far. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kinsey Berkwin. I'm an integrative nutritionist in my online nutrition and wellness practice, Progressive Health and Wellness, where I deliver a root-caused body-mind approach to help ambitious, busy men and women optimize their mental and physical health. So I go live every Monday on Instagram and my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. And all of my talks are stored in both places too. So if you miss the live talk, make sure to follow me on one of those platforms to catch the replay. All right. And speaking of which, let me notify. A few people wanted to be notified when I started going live. So let me do that real quick. Okay. And then we are going to jump into it. I've got a juicy talk for you today. So most of you are probably aware, I talk about the connection between gut health and mental health all the time, food-mood connection, and really many of the root causes that we know are connected to mental health, hormone imbalance, nutrient deficiencies, you name it. And today I'm getting even more specific into that. All right. By talking about a specific kind of digestive issue referred to as SIBO or EMO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or intestinal methanogen overgrowth. So what I'm going to take you through today is I'll describe what those two conditions are. Then we'll talk about so I'll talk about the symptoms, what the two conditions are. They used to be one and the same. It's only in the last 4 years or so that researchers started to refer to them as two different conditions. And then I'll share 4 different ways that these conditions can affect our mental health, followed by a few things that you can do to start to improve both your digestive and mental health. So hello again for those of you that are joining. If you're with me live, please drop a comment. Let me know that you're here. What drew you to this talk? Share where in the world you're watching this from. And please don't hold back any questions that you have. Make sure to tag me in it so that I see the question or the feedback. I would love to make this as valuable as possible for everyone. Okay, so first, let's talk about signs and symptoms of SIBO and EMO. Hi, Karen. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Is it late your time? Early your time? It's probably early your time, early in the morning. Okay. And Lauren, hi. So glad to see you. Thanks for being here. Okay, so let's talk about signs and symptoms of SIBO and EMO. First of all, this cannot go without saying. 50 to 85%, all right, 50 to 85% estimated of irritable bowel syndrome cases, constipation, diarrhea, mixed, bloating, acid reflux, digestive discomfort or pain, right? IBS, if you have it, you know it, it's so miserable, is caused by SIBO or EMO. So let that sink in. If you're listening to this and you have what would be classified as IBS, or you maybe have a formal diagnosis, don't even get me started on the diagnosis of IBS and the fact that it's a catch-all. It really just means you are having digestive symptoms, you're not pooping regularly, you're uncomfortable, and there's no known pathology. And so we're going to call it IBS. I have other talks on that, so I'll table that for now and get off my soapbox. But this is really empowering, right? And really important to know. If you have IBS, you really want to listen to this talk. And you also want to go to my group, my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. Search SIBO/IMO, IMO, and my whole deep dive live talk on that topic will pop up where you can find more information. Okay, so I rest my case. So symptoms and signs of SIBO and IMO. So constipation, diarrhea, or mixed, like you alternate between the two. Acid reflux, bloating and gas, especially if it's like distension, pregnant feeling bloating. I've had clients take a picture, like before and after pictures, right? They wake up in the morning, their stomach feels flat, and then they take a picture at 4 p.m. and they're just like fully distended. So distension style bloating, cramping, digestive cramping or discomfort, foul smelling gas, especially if it smells like eggs or sulfur. And then you may also have extra intestinal symptoms like thyroid issues, skin issues, autoimmune, chronic fatigue, brain fog, hormonal imbalances, difficulty losing weight or difficulty gaining weight. Those are just a few, or especially if you notice, a couple key things. One, do you take an antacid and you struggle to get off of the antacid because the acid always comes back? Two, are you deficient in certain nutrients? I'll name three big ones: B vitamins, especially B12, iron, or magnesium, or actually zinc. I'm going to lump zinc in there too. Do you have white lines on your fingernails? Sign of a zinc deficiency. And as you'll learn in just a minute, that's because SIBO and IMO they create malabsorption. They interfere with absorption, especially of certain nutrients. Lauren, thanks for the tag of someone that might benefit from this information. Everyone, if there's anyone that you know that would benefit from this information, tag them in it or just copy the link and send them this. My intention is for this to be really empowering. So those are some of the signs and symptoms, common signs and symptoms. Especially another thing that's worth mentioning, did you develop digestive issues after a bout of food poisoning? That is really common. Or do you have a history of taking a lot of antibiotics, or do you take birth control or antacid medication? And over time, you've noticed a worsening of your digestive function. Okay, now what are SIBO and IMO? Like I said before, up until the last 4 years, we used to just collectively refer to both as SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It then became a little bit more nuanced when we started describing it as hydrogen dominant SIBO or methane dominant SIBO. And I'll explain the impact of those two different gases. There's three, but the impact of those two different gases. But in the last 4 years, research has advanced and we're now gaining an appreciation that they're really two different conditions. So let me explain what they are and why they're not one and the same. So let me just start. We have bacteria all over our bodies, right? And especially in the colon, we have a whole world of different kinds of microbes. There's bacteria, there's viruses, fungi, commensal parasites even. I said viruses. And we collectively refer to, especially in this case for this conversation, we collectively refer to that microbial community that inhabits the colon as the microbiome. And the microbiome the research has advanced so much, especially over the last decade, on the microbiome and the impact that the microbiome has on our health. Everything from metabolism to inflammation to hormone balance. So much so that researchers are referring to the microbiome as another organ system. So we have a plethora, trillions of bacteria that live in the large intestine. In the small intestine, though, which, by the way, the small intestine is where the majority of digestion and absorption occurs, right? The small intestine is largely where we break down our food into smaller and smaller subparticles and absorb the nutrients, the vitamins, minerals, proteins, essential fatty acids, whole nine yards, and anything that's left over the waste essentially that's left over, as well as bacterial byproducts and digestive byproducts, all end up in the colon. In the colon, we just absorb water and a few more nutrients. Fiber is not absorbed, so fiber helps with bowel integrity. And then we eventually, eliminate the rest out in bowel movements. So the small intestine is largely where absorption of nutrients occurs. And in the small intestines, we have, maybe a few thousand bacteria. There's really not supposed to be that large of a bacterial population in the intestines. However, through a variety of mechanisms. So I'm going to speak to specifically SIBO first, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth first. So through a variety of mechanisms, but especially having had food poisoning. So there's a particular connection to food poisoning and developing post-infectious IBS in the form of SIBO, but other mechanisms too, like high stress, multiple rounds of antibiotics, use of other medications, poor diet, a variety of different reasons. It can allow for an overgrowth. So the few thousand of bacteria that are in the small intestines, they begin to overgrow. We can also, in some cases, have migration of the bacteria inappropriately move from the colon to the small intestines. And even the other direction, our oral microbiome can translocate into the small intestines. And all of these things contribute to an overgrowth and excess of bacteria in the small intestines. When that begins to happen, a number of issues arise. One, these microbes begin to eat certain types of fermentable starches that we eat in our diet from healthy foods. And because the population of a species, their growth is really dependent on food source, if we're eating a lot of those foods, it can allow their population to continue to overgrow. And from there, this bacterial overgrowth wreaks havoc on our health in a number of ways, four of which I'm going to describe today on how that overgrowth is connected to our mental health, especially anxiety and depression. But we see nutrient deficiencies, increased inflammation, hormonal imbalances, gallbladder inflammation, you name it, it's there. SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, again, SIBO produces, when these bacteria ferment our foods, these bacteria will produce hydrogen or hydrogen sulfide gas. And that hydrogen and hydrogen sulfide, they're gasotransmitters, gasometers, you can pronounce it in a couple different ways, but gasotransmitters essentially. And they are absorbed because it's in the small intestines. So they're absorbed into the rest of our body, where they have a systemic effect. But also, one of the big things to note with hydrogen or hydrogen sulfide is they increase the motility of the intestines and lead to predominantly diarrhea presentation. Sometimes, especially if somebody has combination of hydrogen and methane, it can be mixed diarrhea and constipation, but usually diarrhea is going to be part of the presentation. There's some nuances to that, but usually diarrhea is going to be part of the presentation. Okay, that in a nutshell is SIBO. Then there's IMO, Intestinal Methanogen Overgrowth. So intestinal methanogen overgrowth is similar to SIBO. However, in the case of IMO, it involves an overgrowth of what's called archaea in the small intestines. Archaea are their own classification of microbe. They are not bacteria. They're their own classification of microbe. We all have them. They're normal inhabitants. You'll find them all over the world for that matter, but they're normal inhabitants of our GI tract. We'll find them in small intestines. We'll find them in the large intestines. Again, they're normal, but it becomes problematic when they overgrow. The most common kind of archaea that's overgrown in IMO is Methanobacter smithii, We can test for this in the stool test that we run, actually called the GI map stool test. It measures that. And if it's overgrown, you can actually have an excess of Methanobacter smithii in the large or small intestine or both. But these archaea, they function a little bit differently. So archaea will eat the hydrogen. So especially if there's an excess of hydrogen being produced, and this is how it's possible to have both. People can have an elevation of hydrogen and methane gas, or just one. I honestly usually see both, though. I would say like probably 90% of the time I see elevations of both gases. And so especially if there's an elevation of the hydrogen gas, those archaea eat hydrogen and produce methane. And methane slows intestinal motility. In fact, there was a rat study done that showed that methane slowed intestinal motility by 60%. So pretty meaningfully, not to mention, it can actually create almost a reverse motility. So this motility that I'm referring to, the intestines engage in a mechanism called peristalsis. That's this wave-like motion that propels food and intestinal products from one end all the way down to the other. It keeps it moving in one direction. However, methane, like I said, can create almost a slight reverse motility. So some of the key, classic signs of EMO are the sensation that food just sits in your stomach for a prolonged period of time. So you eat a normal amount of food or even a small amount of food, but you feel full for hours afterwards. Excessive belching, excessive belching, nausea, acid reflux, bloating, constipation, and there tends to be especially the presentation of anxiety with EMO. Depression too, but more prevalent is anxiety. We'll see this with SIBO also. But if you have that collection of symptoms, then I would definitely recommend being tested for EMO. So let's see. I think that covers all the signs and symptoms and what they are. So EMO, just like SIBO, creates a number of extra intestinal symptoms too. Same thing in extra intestinal issues in general, right? Chronic inflammation, skin issues, immune issues, aggravation of autoimmunity, mental health, which we're going to talk about, weight and metabolic issues, can't put on weight, can't lose weight, hormonal imbalances, you name it. And this is largely because, a multitude of reasons, but because we know how imperative gut health is to overall health, especially mental health. Okay, so quick, what do you do if you suspect that you have one of these? I'll share that, and then I'm going to share 4 ways that these conditions affect mental health. So if you're watching this and you're like, check, 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 I think I have one of these for sure, and you haven't been tested for it, that is number 1, is to be tested for it. So we do that. The most available test, the least invasive and the most commonly run, is a breath test. The breath test will test for, and you really want to make sure it tests for hydrogen sulfide, and methane. I know I didn't talk too much about hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide, in short, creates more of an urgent diarrhea presentation, oftentimes with more significant GI pain. And if you have, this hair is bothering me, and if you have rotten egg smelling gas, that can be an even bigger red flag. So I'm not going to get into the other nuances of the types of SIBO, but you definitely, if you only have constipation, you're probably okay not testing hydrogen sulfide in there. The 2 gases the testing is more available, particularly at doctor's offices or GI offices, gastroenterology. But the best is to test all 3. Just test all 3. And you do that, it's actually direct to consumer test. Some more progressive offices, especially gastroenterology offices, will run what's called the Trio Smart breath test. You can, if you Google Trio Smart, you can go to their website. You can order it yourself and run it yourself. It is direct to consumer. This is the test that 95% of the time we run in our practice. Unless, like I said, the person has no presentation of diarrhea and it's really just the constipation, then I'll just run one of the tests that just test two gases because there's less likelihood that there's going to be hydrogen sulfide. Run the test in short. Now, I'm going to be frank with you. There are limitations to the testing. There can be false negatives. I've never seen a false positive, but there can be false negatives that now with the understanding and the ability to test for hydrogen sulfide, that has reduced. So we used to see flatline tests when it was really hydrogen sulfide that was elevated and that we just didn't have the ability to test for that. So it's gotten better, but nonetheless, there are limitations, especially with the diarrhea presentation because of how it increases motility and transit time. With the constipation presentation, we see this less often. But nonetheless, I see positive results all the time. And I run this test pretty frequently in my practice. So I think that the odds of it being positive if you have it are pretty high. I'm just sharing that nuance in there. The best, most sensitive form of testing is an aspirate test, but that does involve having an endoscopy, which is much more invasive. And then they sample the fluids in the first part of the small intestines, albeit that is limited because it is only looking at the duodenum and not further down in the small intestines, which can also be the site of bacterial or archaic overgrowths. So get a test though. Get a test is my point. And then and then you have the data. So if you're watching this and you want help having the test run, drop a comment or shoot me a message either through Facebook or through Instagram and let me know, hey, I think I have one of these. I'd love to talk about getting the test run. We'll talk about the steps needed to do that. I'll also let you know, hey, you might be able to get this run through insurance through your doctor's office. And then if anything, we can help you with the interpretation and developing a plan to address it. But you do want to know if that's what you have, because how we then move forward, it really dictates how we move forward and the approach that we take. Okay, with that understanding, I'm now going to go through 4 ways that SIBO and EMO affect mental health, and then I'm going to wrap up with a few things that you can do if you think that you have one of these, or if you know that you have one of these, a few things that you can do to help optimize your digestive and mental health. Okay, way number 1 is nutrient deficiencies. So as I mentioned, the primary site of nutrient absorption is the small intestines. It's worth noting there is absorption that occurs in the stomach, especially of key nutrients, like especially minerals. So magnesium, zinc, iron, let's see what else, calcium, protein actually is digested largely in the stomach, but absorbed in the small intestines. I take that back. So major minerals are absorbed largely we need hydrochloric acid. I should say they're not absorbed in the stomach, but we need hydrochloric acid, proper hydrochloric acid levels in the stomach for them to be absorbed in the small intestines. So the main site of absorption is the small intestines. Now, SIBO and EMO, because of how they affect hydrochloric acid production, they will interfere. They can lower or elevate hydrochloric acid. Either one is a problem. Usually so too low of hydrochloric acid, we're not absorbing those nutrients. We're not breaking down our protein appropriately. It really leaves us predisposed to infection and because hydrochloric acid is protective. So I'm getting off on a tangent here, but nonetheless, can contribute to low hydrochloric acid or high. And if somebody truly has excess hydrochloric acid, they're probably on an antacid. They're probably taking an antacid because of the constant uncomfortable reflux. And the antacid is also going to cause nutrient deficiencies. So I mentioned the minerals. I didn't even talk about the vitamins, right? B vitamins are huge. with proper hydrochloric acid levels. So because of how SIBO and EMO affect the hydrochloric acid levels in the stomach and how they inflame the small intestines, plus bacterial overgrowths. I'll never forget this quote. I was at a conference one time, and the speaker said, "Good bacteria eat our waste products and produce nutrients. Bad bacteria eat our nutrients and produce waste products." Remember that, because I'm going to talk about the waste products next. That's point number 2. But the microbes will actually eat our nutrients, stealing them, robbing them from us. And that's another way. So not only is our intestine so inflamed that it makes it difficult to absorb, but then the bacteria, the archaea themselves, will also eat our nutrients and contribute to those deficiencies. So if we have deficiencies in these major minerals and vitamins, that is a big way that can directly contribute to anxiety and depression. We know magnesium deficiency contributes to, especially to anxiety, but depression also. We know B vitamin deficiency, folate, B6, B12, direct connection to how it affects mental health. Zinc, another one, especially because of how it keeps copper levels in check and histamine levels in check. So we know that connection to be very strong. So especially if you're listening to this and you're like, I always have to take iron because I'm constantly anemic or my iron is always low, like, why, right? You have to ask the question why, especially if you're eating a diet that provides iron. It could be that the SIBO or EMO is absorbing it and stealing it from you. Hi, Katie. So glad to see you hop on. Thanks for joining. Okay, so nutrient deficiencies, number 1. Number 2, I mentioned the produce waste products, right? These bacteria, these archaea produce waste products. This is in the form of what are called endotoxins. So endotoxins are another name for lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. It's not correct to say that the bacteria produce endotoxins. They do. They can produce other forms of endotoxins other than LPS, like TMAO and sulfides and other ammonia and other kinds of endotoxins. But in particular, I'm talking about lipopolysaccharides. They're part of the bacterial outer membrane. So that's why I say it's not technically correct to say that they produce them. But nonetheless, the way that these bacteria, these archaea, interfere or interact with the foods that we eat, and the way that they contain lipopolysaccharides, those endotoxins, we'll say, all can cross through the intestinal lining. They can cross through the blood-brain barrier and directly affect our mental health. So lipopolysaccharides, TMAO, histamines, ammonia, oxalates, those are just a few of the components that these bacteria, or I'll just say microbial overgrowths to refer collectively to SIBO and EMO, few of the different types of endotoxins that can be produced that affect our mental health. So what happens is when these endotoxins are cross the blood-brain barrier into the brain, they trigger the brain's immune cells, which are called microglia cells. These microglia cells are hypersensitive because neurons, brain cells, are very delicate, we'll say. We can regenerate neurons. We used to think that we couldn't, but in the olfactory bulb and the hippocampus, we do see neurogenesis, which is the production of new brain cells. So we know that we can, but it's not very efficient. It's much easier to lose brain cells than it is to build more. So that's not always it's not always in balance. Nonetheless, microglia cells, their job is to protect neurons. And they're hypersensitive, right? They're trigger happy, essentially. So when they're exposed to any of these endotoxins, it elicits the release of certain pro-inflammatory chemicals that are used to protect neurons and kill off any kinds of pathogens or, immobilize toxins. But that inflammation, which is what that generates, the inflammation creates what's called a spreading depression. The inflammatory chemicals that are supposed to protect our neurons and which do also injure them. And what can happen is a mechanism called dendritic pruning. So normally nerve cells talk to each other by the dendrites of one nerve cell connecting to the axon of another nerve cell. And that's how that electrochemical gradient change, that electrochemical communication occurs. That's how we think, that's how we move, that's how we sense our environment, etc. So we want more dendrites connected to the axon. The more dendrites, the stronger the connection, the stronger the communication. Dendritic pruning happens when those dendrites start to prune, right? And that connection weakens. And that, especially when it happens in the frontal lobe or the amygdala or different parts of our brain, then contributes to the experience of anxiety or depression. And it can be, again, directly related to endotoxin production coming from the gut. Okay, that's point number 2. Point number 3, gallbladder inflammation. Gallbladder inflammation. So with microbial overgrowths, just like it can lead to intestinal inflammation, so inflammation of the intestinal lining, it can also lead to inflammation of the gallbladder. A few ways that this can happen. One, the immune system knows those overgrowths are not supposed to be there. So the immune system, 70 to 80% of which resides in the small and large intestines, the immune system's trying to combat those overgrowths through the release of what are called cytokines and chemokines and various forms of immune responses, increases in intestinal secretory IgA and activation of toll-like receptors and mast cells and histamine. So whole thing, there's different mechanisms. Nonetheless, the definition of inflammation is the immune system's response to injury, and this would count as a form of injury. So activation of the immune system to these overgrowths, and then because of how the overgrowths interfere, the endotoxins I was talking about, plus 2 other ways. These overgrowths can form what are called biofilms, which are like protective sheaths that they form over their colonies to protect them from antibiotics and herbal antibiotics, pharmaceutical antibiotics, the immune system. They can form protective sheaths over the exocrine glands in our gut. So the gallbladder, pancreatic exocrine function, kind of blocking it, if you will, functionally blocking it. But then also they can, these overgrowths, especially in SIBO, they eat bile salts. That's another problem. So inflammation, all of this leads to inflammation of the gallbladder. Inflammation of the gallbladder can thicken our bile, creating more of a sludge that also feeds forward into inflaming the gallbladder. Yes, this is a contributor to non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome also. And AFLD, that mechanism can travel back to the liver. But nonetheless, inflammation of the gallbladder further aggravates nutrient deficiencies. Now we're not properly digesting and absorbing our fat or fat-soluble nutrients like vitamins A, D, E, and K, copper, mineral, etc. So that's a problem. And I'm going to lead to number 4 in just a minute. But becomes a feed forward cycle again, because those bile acids actually help maintain proper microbial balance in the small intestines. So if we don't have proper bile acid production or levels in the small intestines, same thing happens, by the way, with hydrochloric acid. We need hydrochloric acid to maintain proper microbial balance in the small intestines. Lacking either of those things, hydrochloric acid or bile acids, changes the pH of the intestines, further contributes to the microbial overgrowths. And like I said, it becomes this vicious cycle. So if you've had your gallbladder removed, if you have this upper right quadrant pain, if you have itchiness, like systemic itchiness or reddened palms or nausea when you eat fatty food, or if fatty food makes you feel bloated and uncomfortable or urgent diarrhea, or if you have yellow stool or stool that floats, gray stool, any of those can be signs of gallbladder issues. That then, like I said, leads to nutrient deficiencies and brings me to point number 4, hormonal imbalances. So that is the fourth way that SIBO and EMO can contribute or affect our mental health. Forgot to mention gallbladder. We talked about how it's needed to not only absorb fat-soluble nutrients like our essential fatty acids and fat-soluble nutrients, which are critical for brain health, but it's also needed for the body to eliminate fat-soluble waste products like estrogen, which I'm just about to talk about, but other fat-soluble waste products that are being eliminated through the liver. Mycotoxins is one, like exposure to mold, certain chemicals, like non-heavy metal chemicals and heavy metal chemicals. All of these things are eliminated through the gallbladder. So if we're not effectively eliminating our waste, there's a problem, right? And that can inflame the brain. Okay, number 4 is hormonal imbalances. So I was just talking about the connection to estrogen. So not only does gallbladder inflammation negatively impact our ability to detoxify estrogen, but everything in the body is a two-way street, it seems like. Higher estrogen levels also inflame the gallbladder. It affects its motility. It doesn't contract appropriately, and it thickens the bile. It creates that bile sludge again. Plus, get this, but microbial overgrowths can also produce something called beta-glucuronidase, which causes us to reabsorb our previously detoxified estrogen from the gut. We just reabsorb it. So it's the equivalent of going to take your trash out and there was a weird little thumbs up thing. I don't know what that was. The equivalent of going to take your trash out and then you see that your trash can, your dumpster's full. So you just throw the trash bag in your living room instead. Like clearly not sustainable, right? That's not where it's supposed to go. It's not where we want it to go. So same thing with estrogen. If it's supposed to be eliminated, it's supposed to be eliminated and not reabsorbed. But look right. But when we have microbial overgrowth, that can happen. So we reabsorb our previously detoxified estrogen from the gut back into our body, and then we can't effectively get rid of it through the gallbladder because our gallbladder is inflamed. And so this leads to higher estrogen levels, the endotoxin production and the nutrient deficiencies lower our progesterone levels. This happens in men, this happens in women. And then the chronic inflammation and nutrient deficiencies and exposure to toxins also stimulates our stress response and hyper stimulates our nervous system, right? It negatively affects our vagus nerve. So now we have nervous system dysregulation and cortisol dysregulation, hypothalamic pituitary dysregulation. So it's not good. And then thyroid, right? Thyroid. In order to convert our T4 into the active form of thyroid hormone, which is T3, goes through the gut is one of the pathways. So GI inflammation, hypothyroidism. And that's just to name a few. Okay, so those are 4 ways that microbial overgrowths can affect our mental health, right? If we have hormonal imbalances, higher estrogen, low progesterone, recipe for anxiety or depression, chronic nervous system dysregulation and hypothalamic pituitary dysregulation, recipe for anxiety or depression, hypothyroidism, right? Again, we know the connection to these things, but the root could actually be in the gut. So what do you do about it? I mentioned step number 1, like get the test, figure out if this is what is a part of your story or not. From there, once you have the data and you know exactly what kind of gases are elevated, step number 1, you may experiment with a low fermentation diet. There's different forms out there. There's low FODMAP. There's the specific carbohydrate diet. Some people even do carnivore for SIBO or EMO. But a low fermentation diet, what it's designed to do is withhold the types of fermentable starches that feed the bacteria and contribute to these overgrowths. Now, with EMO, I don't see this to make that big of an impact. With SIBO and more of the diarrhea or mixed presentations, it can. Identifying the FODMAP, for example, the type of starch that is feeding your overgrowth can make a difference. It won't fix the problem, but it can help, and it can help you get rid of it. But in SIMO, in EMO, I really rarely see this make a difference. But it could be worth trying 2 to 3 weeks, try a low fermentation diet. And then afterwards, you start to reintroduce the types of starches back in. So try a low fermentation diet for 2 to 3 weeks. Number 2 is space your meals by at least 3 to 4 hours, ideally closer to that 4-hour mark. The reason being is there's a mechanism in the gut called the migrating motor complex. And the migrating motor complex is this wave-like motion that the intestines make. It's like a cleansing motion, cleansing and healing and repair. It's a wave-like motion that propels bacterial byproducts and food byproducts and undigested food from one end all the way down to the other so that it can be eliminated. Unlike peristalsis, though, the migrating motor complex is initiated only in a fasted state after at least 4 hours of not eating. And the migrating motor complex keeps the musculature of the intestines intact. It helps reduce inflammation, helps strengthen the immune system in the mucosal lining, and really importantly, 2 things. One, it maintains the integrity of the sphincters, those one-way valves that keep food and intestinal contents only moving in one direction. And that motility helps prevent the accumulation, the stagnation of microbes in the small intestines. So it's critical, in other words, very important. So spacing your meals by ideally 4 hours and snacks can help maintain the integrity and initiate the migrating motor complex, which is really, really important for preventing, especially the relapse of SIBO or EMO. Intermittent fasting can help also. At least 12 hours between when you finish eating one day and when you start eating the next day. I encourage 14 for most people, sometimes 16. But that way you're getting in more rounds of that migrating motor complex. Okay, number 3 for things that you can do, help exercises to balance your nervous system or regulate your nervous system. So vagal tone is so important for proper intestinal motility and function, right? The integrity of the gut lining, microbiome balance, proper inflammatory response. The vagus nerve is so important, which is why stress is a big trigger, either trigger or aggravator of microbial overgrowths. So ways that you can support the vagus nerve, breath work is amazing. Breath work is my favorite. I love resonance breathing. So I use a heart rate variability device. You've heard me talk all about HRV before. Love HRV and resonance breathing. But some easy ways would be like box breathing, for example. So inhale to a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale to a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, and repeat. The prolonged exhale is really key in resonance breathing too. So another form of breath work would be inhaling to a count of 4 and exhaling to a count of 6 to prolong that exhale. So breath work is great. Do this for like 15 to 20 minutes a day. Gargling, singing or humming loudly are two other ways that you can support the vagus. And then one thing that's really, really big is at every meal, be present with the meal. Be relaxed, be seated, pay attention to the smells, the textures, the tastes of the meal. Don't even start eating the meal until you're so present you begin to salivate. You can make yourself salivate. So present you begin to salivate. That is when you know that you're in a proper nervous system state to begin eating, and you're releasing digestive juices to properly digest and absorb your meal. Okay. Those are 3 things that I'll recommend. Actually, a couple other things. One, enhance protein, focus on protein. Amino acids from protein are the building blocks to our neurochemicals. So we need tryptophan and tyrosine and other amino acids to build our serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine, acetylcholine. So not only that for mental health, but protein, especially animal protein, won't feed the SIBO. It is a macronutrient that is very safe for not feeding the SIBO, and it can prevent that bloating. You could have other issues. You could have low hydrochloric acid or gallbladder issues that cause you to bloat with eating protein, but optimally, it will be less triggering than especially carbs. Certain types of carbs will be. So really focus on protein. And then lastly, consider supplementation, right? Consider supplementing with a B complex, with a mineral complex, essential fatty acids, like bridge the gap with the fact that you're probably not absorbing a lot of what you're getting from food. So take in more to help bridge that gap. And again, keep your nutrient levels elevated or higher despite having that overgrowth. So that's what I've got for you today. I know I covered a ton of information. If you want more information on SIBO or EMO, again, go to my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. Search the group SIBO/EMO, and that live talk will come up. And I talk so much more about like what you do for them. What should you do from a diet perspective, supplements, pharmaceuticals, what the prognosis or trajectory looks like. So lots more information there, but nonetheless, we know for a fact SIBO and EMO and other digestive issues too, but SIBO and EMO have a direct connection to mental health, especially anxiety and depression. And if this information was enlightening, if you learned something, let me know what you learned. What was the best part of this talk, your biggest takeaway? Drop it in the comments. Share this talk with others that may benefit from this information. Meredith, I just saw that you joined. Hello. So good to see you, Meredith. I'm glad that you're here. And if you're watching this thinking, I need to find some freaking answers, right? My digestive issues, my mental health, they're really suffering, and you are ready to find answers and get started on a path designed to finally get results. Shoot me a message on Facebook or on Instagram or in my bio of both of these platforms or on my website. You'll find book a free 15-minute discovery call, and we can get to know each other better, talk more about the concerns that you're having and what you're looking for. If I don't think I'm a good fit for you, I'll tell you up front. We have a very busy practice, and I'm only accepting clients that I really feel like I can make a meaningful impact in their health. So I'll let you know if I'm not a good fit, and we'll refer you to one of the people within our, the practitioners within my network. But if I think I can help, we'll talk about what next steps look like for getting started. Hi, Shannon. Thanks for joining. All right, everyone. Hope this was helpful, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Talk to you later. Bye.